Hello, class. So this will be the lecture on Chapter 10, which is Cinema and the Digital Arts. So we're going to kind of start off talking about the first experimental color movie or film. And it was actually in Germany, and it was shown kind of under these false pretenses under the suppressive Nazi regime. It was called Circles by Oskar Fischinger, and it was a non-representational film. And it kind of featured a lot of these circles that were interlocking and rings that moved across the screen, and then kind of a soundtrack of kind of an orchestra in the background. It was only a couple of minutes long, and it really was kind of shown with other really typical black and white films of the time, and they kind of snuck it in between those films. And for the most part, the public seemed to enjoy this experiment in color and form that Circles brought to the table. So the artist kind of had to sneak this film in because it was potentially on the radar of the Nazis as modern art. And as we talked about earlier when we were talking about censorship, we did do an Edpuzzle on Nazi censorship of modern art, and they kind of regarded modern art as degenerate art. And so in order to avoid censorship, the artist Fischinger made Circles an advertisement. He just put, the last few moments of the film, he put the name of the company in an advertising slogan, so he kind of snuck it in there. And he did eventually move to the United States, Los Angeles in 1936. And he is basically one of the first people considered to be a video artist. I couldn't find Circles, but I found another one that he made just a few years later that's probably pretty similar to Circles. And so we can actually watch this. It's kind of neat to see because it shows some of his work and what it's like basically. So just kind of circles moving along with the music and kind of an experiment with color, movement, sound, all working together. Really actually pretty fun to watch. So I'm guessing Circles was very similar to this video here. I'll pause that and just continue on with the lecture here. So we'll just be kind of examining the origins of cinema, and we'll trace the innovations and techniques through movies that have broken creative ground, basically. And then we'll also end up touching on the newer technology and special effects and production and the digital revolution that has really led to creation of new art forms and new ways of presenting film. So we'll kind of talk about the birth of cinema. So cinema is kind of an extension of photography. So the camera takes a rapid sequence of photos of a moving subject. So if you do that, the photos are, if you view them in quick succession, the appearance of movement is created in the viewer's eye, which is actually called persistence of vision. And it's basically that retention of the image on the back of your eye in the retina of your eye. So flip books, children's flip books, if you've ever seen those, basically operate on the same principle. Cartoons are illustrated in the same way, moving cartoons such as, Mulan or any of those. And so the principle of persistence of vision has actually been around for quite a while. Children's flip books have been around since 1868, so that's quite a while ago. We'll actually talk about kind of the first primitive film that was ever made. Edward Muybridge, he was actually commissioned to go to the racetrack and take photos of a horse running along the racetrack to see if at any point all four horse legs were off of the ground. And so he did this, and he called it this at first, zoopraxiscope, I believe. This quick succession of images that used the persistence of vision. But luckily that didn't stick, because that's kind of an obnoxious term. So this is basically the roots of cinema right here. It's basically this experiment where Muybridge, took pictures of the horse all along the racetrack. He had cameras, a series of cameras hooked up along the racetrack where a tripwire was connected and the horse's leg would actually pull on a string, which would then take the shot, the camera shot. And so Muybridge actually figured out a way to put all these together and line them up and show this series of photos. And it did actually prove that the horse is actually airborne, as you can see in these two shots here. But he did figure out how to project them, these photographs that he took in rapid succession. So he was really the first one to come up with the first primitive film. The first practical film camera was actually invented in 1891 in California, and it used a long strip of film and an electric motor fed through the camera at 16 frames per second, basically. And then it could be projected at that same rate of 16 frames per second to yield a movie for a viewing audience. And by the late 1890s, cinema was actually a really popular entertainment piece. And by this time, most major cities had movie theaters. And these early movie theaters projected short movies, usually less than 10 minutes in length. And few at this time accepted cinema as an art form, probably much for the same reasons they didn't accept photography at first as an art form, because it just seemed like a mechanical recording device. But that will eventually change. And in order to kind of gain public acceptance, early filmmakers made their movies look like performances from plays, from live plays, from theater. And theater goes way back. Live theater goes way back in time. So technology for recording sound on film was actually not perfected until the 1920s. So early films were silent projections that were accompanied oftentimes by live music, such as a piano player might be in the same room while the film was projecting in the movie theater, just to add music. So the power of cinema comes from its ability to reconstruct time, basically. That's like the number one thing about it. And it's not inhibited by the constraints of our traditional idea of time. A movie can represent the past, the present, the future. It can mix it up in any order or sequence that it chooses to. And the thing about cinematic time that's kind of interesting is it can really affect us on a deeper emotional level than actual clock time, because cinematic time can be constructed in a way that really captures how we feel about time and how time makes us feel, rather than how time actually functions, which is kind of an interesting concept. So editing and also the manipulation of time by slowing or accelerating motion can be used to convey emotions or mess with the sequence of time in a movie. So one of the most important directors to pioneer certain effects of cinematography, which is the art of movie photography and camera work, was a Frenchman named Georges Méliès, and he actually began his career as a magician. So it kind of makes sense that he was a super creative individual and he was able to use the camera in a way that no one else did. That actually really showed his background in magic and live theater. So between 1896 and 1913, he directed over 500 movies. So he was very prolific. Most of them were just a few minutes long, but his most famous is Voyage to the Moon. It's a very famous early movie, and he used dissolves or fading instead of rapid cutting in between his scenes. So this actually kind of really showed his roots in the world of magic. And he also perfected visual effects such as time-lapse photography, so giving the illusion of very fast shooting, He would also remove an actor or an item from a shot. So he would pause the camera, remove the item, start the camera back up, and it would look like it had disappeared. So he had a lot of little tricks and things that he employed from kind of that came from his background as a magician that really helped and was very innovative in the use of the techniques with the camera. So we'll actually take a quick look at this movie, A Trip to the Moon. I just have some of it, and it's actually really neat, like all the stuff he did. So here's some shots of the film. I mean, really, it looks like a stage. I mean, he has, but then there's also like, cutting in between. This isn't actual footage from, but here's some footage from it. So he faded in between those two shots there. He's got some pretty elaborate sets that he's using. So he really has some cool things that he's doing. He's very creative. So if you want, you should check it out because I think the whole thing is probably up for view on YouTube. And here's a still shot of it from the book, The Voyage to the Moon. So like I said, it's one of the most highly regarded movies, and in it, 4 astronauts climb into a bullet-shaped projectile and are shot to the moon. And there's kind of a culture already there on the moon that kind of resembles Pacific Islander culture here on Earth. So it's kind of an interesting, fun film. And so between 1907 and 1916, American director W.D. Griffith helped to bring the motion picture from its infancy as an amusement to the surface, and actually bring it to the stature of artistic expression. So he really helped pioneer it as being, an art. So Griffith removed the camera from its fixed position as an audience member and actually was able to move it around in order to better express narrative content. And he was good about moving the camera where it would best reveal the meaning of each scene. So a scene would actually be now composed of several shots taken from different angles, which greatly increased the viewer's feeling of involvement. So he was one of the first pioneers to start doing that. And he started assembling scenes from several shots, which involves a lot of film editing, which is one of the things that he was very innovative with. And it's basically the process in which the editor selects the best shots from raw footage and then reassembles them into kind of meaningful sequences that create a unified progression, basically. He also used a technique called parallel editing to compare events occurring at the same time in different places or different times. So a person might be in danger, and then he would also show the approach of the would-be rescuer. And he used this technique in his feature Intolerance, in which he cut back and forth among 4 stories about intolerance of various kinds, set in 4 different periods of history. So he's really jumping around in time in that movie, which is an innovation. And here's a still from his movie Intolerance from 1916. And it's pretty amazing set, really. And he was also one of the first to use the close-up and the long shot. So today the close-up is one of the most widely used shots in film, but when Griffith first wanted to try it, his cameraman thought the idea of a head without a body was really ridiculous. So it's just, we've come a long way. In a long shot, the camera actually is at a distance from the subject to emphasize, large groups or people in a setting such as this piece here. This is considered a long shot because it's from very far away and it shows an entire scene, basically. So several other early shot innovations came from Russian directors. Let's see how much time we have here. I'll let this go and we will continue on with some of the Russian directors next.